Welcome to this panel, a very special one. I think this is the first Impact Showcase panel, and I'm also aware this is the last panel before your lunch, so we'll make sure we're on time. We have four very distinguished speakers and talking about the impact of their daily work and how that can be amplified through networks building with you all. And all of them fall into the three focus areas of the PA as climate action and sustainable communities, inclusive education, and resilient healthcare. So I'll quickly introduce our four speakers. On the screen is Ambassador Elizabeth Cousens, President and Chief CEO of UN Foundations. With me on the stage are from the right side is Neil Kim Hua, the Managing Director of Center for Nature and Climate at World Economic Forum, and Denise, the President of Autism Resource Center at Singapore, and last but not least, Shamina Singh, founder and president of Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth. So we will start with the presentation from each of our speakers, and then we'll leave some time for the questions and answers. So make sure you scan on the QR code on your table to send in the questions. We'll start with Ambassador Cousens, please.
Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be with you all, and sorry not to be there with you in person. First, for those of you who don't know the UN Foundation, we were created 25 years ago by philanthropist Ted Turner, who gave $1 billion to create an organization that would work with the United Nations and its partners to help solve global problems at scale. Ted believed that global problems needed global solutions, what the Secretary General at the time, Kofi Annan, called problems without passports. And for 25 years, we have built funds, campaigns, coalitions, and other initiatives to address challenges that range from preventable childhood disease to climate change to gender inequality. And today I'd like to share with you a more recent experience with one initiative, the COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund. First slide, please. In February 2020, our global health team had a portfolio that included immunization, malaria, antimicrobial resistance, and universal health coverage. By March 2020, we were working on COVID-19, and we were embarking on an experiment that would end up building what I believe may be the most diversified pooled fund ever deployed globally against a single threat. Let me just quickly recap the timeline. At the end of 2019, there was rising concern about a novel virus. By the end of January, WHO had declared COVID-19 a public health emergency of international concern. In February, WHO produced a plan, the Strategic Preparedness and Response Plan, that estimated initial response costs first at $61 million and soon at $1.7 billion for overall 2020 needs. WHO's concern was partly about having enough resources, but it was especially about having fast and flexible resources, given the unpredictability of such a fast-moving crisis. So they asked the UN Foundation if we could create a new kind of fund to tap the generosity of non-traditional donors, meaning philanthropies, businesses, organizations, individuals, at this exceptional time. 3 weeks after WHO called us, we launched the COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund on March 13th, which happened to be 5 days after we went into lockdown, as I imagine many of you did as well. Next slide. This is just a quick snapshot of recalling where we were at the time 2 years ago. Next slide. We thought success would be something like raising $25 to $50 million. In fact, within 2 weeks, we raised $100 million. In 6 weeks, we raised more than $200 million. And by the time the fund sunset at the end of 2021, the SRF had raised more than $257 million from over 140 companies, organizations, and foundations, and more than 660,000 individuals from 190 countries. We tried to leave no stone unturned. Next slide. We engaged the creative community. Next slide. We engaged diverse corporate partners from TikTok to Salesforce to FIFA. Next slide. We were on NASDAQ. Next slide. And overall, the fund galvanized an extraordinary outpouring of solidarity for COVID response. Again, 662,000 people, 140 companies. We did employee giving campaigns, cause marketing, point of purchase sales, donated ad sales. We had a network of 20 plus global fiduciary partners that range from China to Switzerland, and gifts that range from $3 to $10 million. And there were, of course, many collateral impacts in public health communications, advocacy, and education along the way. And alongside that, of course, there were many, many other efforts at COVID response, extraordinary generosity, including with sovereign donors who stepped up to mobilize support for WHO, the ACT Accelerator, among many other initiatives and platforms. But the Solidarity Response Fund was the singular source of flexible early funding available quickly for the most urgent needs. Next slide. So this map just gives you a little glimpse of where the SRF dollars went. They went from critical early work on the COVID supply chain system to the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, to the Africa CDC, the UN Refugee Agency, the World Food Program, and of course, WHO. And the impact was substantial. As just one measure, among other impacts, over 50% of the PPE that went to low and middle income countries in 2020 was financed by this fund. Next slide. And from the beginning, we were committed to learning. We documented absolutely everything. We produced frequent comprehensive reports, held calls with donors. We produced a playbook that outlined how to do what we were doing and to try to create a resource for the community to learn. We commissioned independent evaluations, and this just gives a little bit of a snapshot of some of the findings. Last slide. We learned so much from this experience about what is possible. We learned about conditions for success. We learned about how to be better prepared for the next crisis, because of course this is not the last pandemic, and it's certainly not the last global crisis that will require solidarity of this magnitude and speed. So we were so humbled and privileged by the generosity we were able to mobilize in 2020 and 2021. We learned a lot about what works, and especially about how to connect the really disparate worlds of philanthropy in all of its diversity, citizen action, the United Nations, and other official players. And we're just really grateful here today to be able to tell you some of that story and have the opportunity to share, to learn, and to get stronger together. So thank you very much, and look forward to hearing from my colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador Cousens. That's such an exciting case of collaborating and also engaging the multiple stakeholders at the global scale. And multi-stakeholders is also something that the web focuses a lot. So Kim Hua, share with us, what's your initiative on the stage?
Thanks, Lisin. So I oversee nature and climate work at the World Economic Forum. And really, when you look at nature and climate, we need a systems approach. Issues are interconnected, whether it's climate connected to biodiversity, to livelihoods, human well-being. And the way we look at the systems, I'll describe them as three different systems: food, land, ocean systems, built environment, and infrastructure, as well as the energy and extractive systems. And when you look at the need for systems change, public-private collaboration is absolutely critical. And right now, we know that with this crisis, we need a very quick and scalable cost correction. And I thought what I might share here is two programs that the World Economic Forum has been very much involved in, and where philanthropic funding was quite critical in catalyzing the efforts. The first is actually the Trillions Trees Challenge, right? Some of you might have heard of it. This was launched 2 years ago, and really it is how do we actually embark on large-scale land restoration, tree planting, and tree conservation efforts. And with the help of some catalytic, a very small amount of catalytic funding, we actually mobilized corporates to pledge towards land restoration, and then linked these pledges to implementing agencies on ground. And today we've actually launched chapters in the US, in India, in the Sahel region, in Africa, as well as most recently in China. 2 years into the launch, I think pledges are now above 100 billion trees. And we are not there yet. We're aiming for 1 trillion, but we're on a good momentum forward. The second program that I want to talk about is around industry decarbonization. And I know many of you are actively involved in various forms in this area. And here our efforts will focus on the hard-to-abate sectors. They contribute 30% of global emissions. And hard-to-abate sectors are in the mobility sectors, aviation, shipping, trucking, and in the material sector, cement, steel, aluminum, and then chemicals, right? So what the forum actually did was, now that companies have made their net zero pledges, governments have made their net zero pledges, how do we actually translate ambition to action? And in order to do that, the first, obviously, you have to start with plans. And what the forum actually did, again, this was with some catalytic funding support from foundations, was to put together experts and industry peer groups to come together to map out that pathway forward, right? And this was not a trivial process. It required a lot of science as well as expertise to input into the roadmaps. And we've actually, these are publicly available information. We've publicly launched the action roadmaps forward. And obviously the question is, what next? Now that you have a plan, then we need to move on to execution. And a lot of this is mobilizing policy, governments, as well as standard setting institutes to see how we can actually translate this to actual projects on ground, mobilizing policy incentives as well as financing, various financing instruments to scale the efforts. And we didn't stop there. So last November, we also looked at getting corporates to commit to purchasing commitments. Because now that companies are moving on to net zero steel, net zero cement, and other net zero commitments and producing these goods and services, they want to be confident that there will be consistent demand signals. So we've actually put together companies to actually pledge to buy green when these goods come on stream. And this formation of a marketplace, I think, will be able to help, hopefully, scale as well as accelerate progress towards climate mitigation and the climate agenda. So I'll stop here. 2 programs that we have launched and very much benefited from catalytic philanthropic funding, which could hopefully help scale public and corporate activity.
Thank you for sharing the very exciting cases, and also many of the audience today can contribute and get involved in that as well. So we're moving from the global scale, multinational scale, into a more local solution. And DPM has said, if you ask what the government should do, ask what the society should do as well. And we'll have one very distinguished speaker who represents the society, Denise. Denise is not just the president of the Autism Resource Center, but also a member of the parliament of Jalan Pasar Group, representation, constituency, and mayor of Central Singapore District. But most importantly, she's best known for her advocacy for the risk of left behind in Singapore. So Denise, please.
Hi, thank you for having me. And today I want to talk about a topic that was not mentioned very much, except for rare diseases this morning. This is about disability. And my topic here is maximizing the potential of the disabled in Singapore. But I think some of the ideas can be also used elsewhere. They are about, I would say, usually 5% of every population, regardless of what your level of development is in this country, in your country. Usually 5%. And for a country like Singapore with a population of 5 million, we estimate about 250,000 people that are affected directly by disability, whether born or acquired during life. And with that, if an average size of a family is about 4, then 3 other people would also be affected. So we estimate that in our country of 5 million, around 1 million people are affected either directly or indirectly by disability. I'll talk about 3 projects here that I'm involved in, have the privilege of starting here in Singapore with some friends, volunteers, and some professionals here. We basically started all these projects from scratch, and then gained the attention of government and some sponsors, and we are still in the process of trying to do better. So my first one is on the, this one, the first one. I use the word disability or disabled not out of disrespect. I think many people call it special needs or differently abled or neurodiverse. Today I'll just use the word disabled, okay? And my first project that I want to share was a school called Pathlight School that volunteers and us started in Singapore from scratch. Let me just, does this work? 20 years ago, when my son, 20 over years ago, when my son was diagnosed with autism, I was plunged into a world that I never knew existed. At that time, we found that although Singapore boasted excellence in many things, mainstream education, airports, housing, and so forth. Education of people with special needs or who are different is not one of our areas of excellence. And at that time, many of us who are affected, the families, decided either to migrate to a country where there's more provisions for such students, or we stay on and try to make a difference. My husband and I got to know some people, some other families who I think will not be able to be in a position to migrate, and therefore we decided to stay in Singapore to try to see if we can make a difference. If we couldn't, we would then migrate. I'm here now 28 years later. And there was a gap that was felt during that time. At that time, 20 over years ago, it was really, schools were this way. You were either a mainstream school, and in Singapore, academics is always, quite seductive for people to try to achieve excellence in, or you're in a special school. And a lot of the special schools are dealing mostly with life skills. And so there was a gap for students who are either, for autistic students at that time, who are cognitively able to assess studies, the education, but did not have a place in the system. So what we did as a group of volunteers, we basically started what we call Pathlight School. And this is today, this was the first of its kind. It's the first autism school that offers a blend of mainstream academics, because the kids could still study, but also what we call a hidden curriculum, where we train people in life skills. And the long and short of it, we basically were able to, well, nobody wanted to come to a school like this, because if my child at that time was able, why would I want to go to a special school? So we started with 41. We need to break even at 400. Nobody wanted to come to the school, but we did all we can to make sure that this will be a school like no other, and it would really meet the needs of those we know fell through the crack. And so what we did was, I remember hiring teachers. We couldn't afford them because mainstream teachers were quite expensive. And, but we told the teachers who were willing to come, make this school as good as it can be. And the bar is, your KPI is not just number of students or your grades, but for every relative you have who has a special needs child, you would recommend them to this school. So that's what we did. Anyway, the long and short of it was, today the school stands at 2,000, close to 2,000, 1,009, and we were able to gain the attention of the Ministry of Education and many others, and it became the largest school here, and we developed, and I came from a corporate world, and so systems and processes and scalability, KPIs, dashboards are kind of the mantra, and we did all we can to make sure that the school is good, and that we're also able to work with the other 19 special schools. And I think today, if you're a Singaporean, you know that the government and the rest of society has accorded a lot more attention to this community. So that's for Pathlight. Let me show you the second. Now this is a very special photograph for me. It was our students, so I'm still a volunteer, a board member there. And our students were actually always invited now. They're never forgotten by the mainstream side, by the ministries. So this is a photograph of our students together with other mainstream students and other people in society enjoying the National Day Parade. And we're always very proud that they could be accepted into society this way. And there are still things to improve, but this is one of the photographs that really inspire me. There's still lots of things to do. I'll talk about it later. Now, the next program that I want to share about is something that a group of us also started from scratch. Now, what you see are the fancy, glamorous photos, but I just want to let you know that behind every glamorous dream, if you have been working out there, you know that behind every glamorous vision are 1,000 and 1,000,000 non-sexy, plodding work that you have to be done. Peter Drucker always said that, every vision degenerates into just work, plodding work. And so we did a lot behind the scene, and this is, I think it's 8th or 9th year. I don't know if Speaker Chuan Jin is inside, but he's a great supporter. But we tried to get folks who are very important to come and support this, because we wanted the Purple Parade, which is Singapore's largest ground-out movement, to bring about awareness of this community to the rest of Singapore. And many of you here, I think the banks are here, UBS is here, Credit Suisse, you're all participants of this parade. It's not just there's carnival, there's a march past, there is a concert and so forth, and there are tickets to be bought. Please support this year's parade, But the key is really to bring about awareness. In Singapore, if you live here, you know that we have the pink dot, which is really very strong in the LGBT community awareness. We have the, not black magic, but yellow ribbon, which supports the ex-offenders, you know, and then you have the whites representing the whites, you know, and the blues and so forth, you know. So, but this is purple, and purple represents, do not forget that this group of people are here, remember them, you know, there's not much budget a lot of times. After I got into politics, it's a bit better. I use some of my CDC funds, but there's always not enough. And so this year, please, this is the 10th year, and so this year, please come and join us. It's at, we managed to get, again, all by supporters and sponsors, Suntec City, to close the road and let us, you know, do it there, 29th October. If you're in Singapore, please come and join us there. So this is Purple Parade, and still on. We are moving on to the next phase to go beyond just awareness. We're building leadership. I will find my successors as well. I will still be around, but we wanted more people to be involved, and we wanted persons with disabilities to come and lead this whole movement as well. So we have Peng Siu here and Alistair in the photograph and so forth. So these are some of the things that we're doing in Singapore to build awareness. And so it's ground up, 40, 50 disability organizations with about 200 business corporations as well. So I encourage you to join us if you can. I'm not asking you for money, just support and come and join us. Okay. The third is, let me just, last one that I wanted to share is the Purple Symphony. This is an orchestra that's also started from scratch. I didn't have money to do it until I joined the CDC. So we threw in some money, and then, but not enough. So we got a GIC, government investment. We got some other folks to help. I think Temasek, we're trying to seduce you to come and help us as well. So this is the, I'm not asking you for money here. This is Singapore's largest inclusive orchestra. 100 over musicians with and without special needs. More than 60 of them, or 60% of them, have some form of disability. You have the deaf playing, doing percussion. You have the autistic, you know, hearing, sometimes a lot of sensory, but playing instruments, the string instruments and so forth. We started with not much, you know, 40 of us, 50 of us. We were able to build this to 100 and 100 plus people, and really based on the mantra that, you know, never, what do I say? Never let what, I always tell our folks, never let what you cannot do, never let what you cannot do stop you from doing what you can. And you'll find that many of them, quite a number of our musicians here, some of them have sensory issues, but, you know, they'll be playing so well with all the, you know, beautiful music and sometimes quite noisy. And the minute, you know, they stop playing, they'll be covering their ears because it's just too noisy for them or too difficult. So we have this, and because music is indeed the universal language. So this is the third one that we're doing. We're also trying to see if I can find a permanent home for Purple Symphony, because, you know, I'm getting old in age, and we also our volunteers as well. We want to find a home just like the Singapore Symphony Orchestra or the Singapore Chinese Orchestra. But this whole thing is really also built from scratch by a group of us. That's the third one and the last one, and maybe I'll just share the challenges we have. I think like many of our projects, you see so many calls to action. There's always, in Singapore, we use the local term, money not enough. And in this case, money not enough always, and manpower also not enough, because we cannot compete with the private sector very much and the government sector very much, who normally pays a little bit better or a lot better. And, but I think the passion, or Mr. Grimm spoke about purpose and compassion, I think that kind of purpose actually is one of the psychological paycheck that we could offer, although we try to be as competitive as possible in our salary. So it's always, for all these projects that we do, resources are always there. The second one is this. We are also sometimes victim of our own success. For education, I think a lot of resources have been put in for the young, but there's a lot of front loading for preschools, for, how do you say, children, for teenagers. But life carries on after 18, when one leaves the formal school door. And from 19, 20 onwards up to 75, the resources for adults with disabilities are not quite there. Many of them are not employed. Many of them do not do lifelong learning. You change jobs 5 or 6 times in your career, but many of them may not have that or do not have that. So that's a lot of work we do, which also leads me to the second last slide I have, which is really in the autism spectrum, an autism sector. What we did was really a group of us, again, volunteers, we basically came up with what we call Autism Enabling Master Plan, and trying to see where the gaps are and trying to prioritize some of the areas that if we want to do work, then let's come together. And these are in areas of quality assurance for education, planning for life, lifelong learning, employment, getting more people employed, ensuring how people can get residential if they are, they no more have their family homes, and also planning for life, especially after the death of their parents. So these are some priority areas. If you're interested in your country, and this can be a basis, a template also for other disabilities. If you're interested, happy to share this with you. And finally,
thank you, Denise. That's very exciting experiences. I'm sure everyone is thinking about how they can contribute to this. But let me also involve a very critical part of the discussion as well. That's the corporate. And Shamina, share with us what corporate can do, especially given the technology know-how, the global reach.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. I recognize the time is running short, so I'll just keep it very streamlined, as we do in corporate, the corporate world. But the reason that I'm so glad to be here is that we're thrilled that Mastercard and the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth has joined as a founding member of the Philanthropy Alliance. And so we're really looking forward to working with all of the members to scale impact across the region. Why is that important? The thing that I think we bring to the conversation is we're trying to move philanthropy from sort of these transaction-oriented programmatic things to transformation at a systemic level. And what does that look like from the private sector? It looks like a model that we've created at the center that really thinks about leveraging the assets of the firm for social and environmental impact. Now at Mastercard, that means that global network, technology, data, people, and capital, but all combined to impact social and environmental situations. I'll just give maybe one example because we're a little bit short on time. But in Indonesia, as an example, we started something called Mastercard Academy 2.0, which is a partnership with the government where we took the risk, because philanthropic capital should be the most risky capital that one uses, but we took the risk to create the program to upskill 100,000 Indonesians for the digital economy. What that meant was we worked with a local university to create a certification system around cybersecurity. We also worked with another organization to create skills for small businesses and small business entrepreneurs to grow their businesses in Indonesia. On the cybersecurity side, we're glad to say that even during COVID, we kept it going, thanks to the work, I'm sure, of the Minister of Health who was here earlier. But we've realized that not only did we reach our target of 100,000 Indonesians, we've actually surpassed the target, and it's already it's on its way to at least 150% of goal by the end of the year. But what's more important is this piece around outcome for the individuals who go through the program. We've realized that 85%, at least 85% of the graduates of the cybersecurity program go on to get jobs in the IT space, and that almost 20% of them earn more than those who haven't gone through the program. That's an example of Mastercard using its ability to train. The things that we need for cybersecurity professionals we've built into the curricula, and it's been so successful that now the government in Indonesia has actually adopted the curricula, and they're going to scale it. So that's what happens when you use philanthropic capital to pilot programs, to do the test and learn, to figure out what works very quickly, to build in the measurement and evaluation, use your data and your analytics to create the dashboards and the measurements that allow you to scale quickly. And so now the government will continue to scale it in perpetuity. And the same has happened for the Small Business Initiative, and what we're looking to do next year is double down on digital in Indonesia. So that's just one example of a program where if you can use the assets of your company in a way to create scaled impact along with your philanthropy, you really start to see, at least we've started to see, that long-term change is really achievable. And that also means that we have to work very closely in partnership with government, with public sector organizations, with social sector organizations to really move that needle from, again, transactional impact to transformational systems change.
Thank you, Shamina. Also, bear in mind the time. We probably don't have time for question and answer, but I want to end with one word from each one of you that you share with us very heartening success stories. What's the most critical factor of the journey? Let me start with the Ambassador Cousens. One word.
Oh, one word, ambition.
I'm sorry, initiative.
Ambition.
Ambition, yes. One word is ambition. And Phua?
I'm going to cheat. I will give 3, and I wrote them down. I think in my job, I hear a lot of bad news every day from the science. And I think the times call for a sense of spirituality, to Dr. Harold Ling's point, a sense of solidarity, and also a sense of shared destiny.
Very true. And Denise?
Keeping the major the major. I think it's easy to be seduced by vanities, ambitions, media, and other people who ask you to, do other things. But I think if we can focus on the thing that we set out to do and be willing to dirty our hands and not just articulate a dream, and keeping that major, the major always, I think things will happen and many lives can be improved.
Thank you. And Shamina?
Just a phrase that we use a lot at the center is that your net work shouldn't determine your net worth. So we're always making sure that regardless of where you're born or where you're raised, you have access to possibility and you have access to reach your full potential as you're right in this world. So.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our great panelists for the discussion.